In today's column, I'm going to explain to you what the Joe Rogan Effect is. Essentially, it's a phrase I've coined to describe the rise in non-journalists' influence who are tackling issues that are dominating mainstream media. So on New Year's Eve 2021, Joe Rogan published another episode of the Joe Rogan Experience on Spotify, and it was subsequently shared on YouTube. But subsequent to that, YouTube took down that video and that episode. Joe interviewed Dr. Robert Malone, who is the man that claims he invented the mRNA vaccine platform. Now, we're all familiar with mRNA in a COVID world and living with COVID, the pandemic, and vaccines. So Joe Rogan might not be somebody that you are familiar with as a public sector pro, but I've been listening to him for many years. You see, as a podcaster going back 5-6 years, he was always the influencer in our scene who commanded most views, most influence, and he's the first podcaster to do an exclusive deal with Spotify. He's got millions of listeners, and let's face it, built up serious influence right across the world. His background is comedy and UFC, but now he's begun to delve into some mainstream issues, the whole concept of this podcast. So a debate began to rage right across the social networks, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, YouTube, and people began discussing the Joe Rogan effect, as I describe it, and how his influence and his leaning into conversations around vaccines, about the role of government, pharma companies, and suggestions that they have other interests as opposed to merely public health and dealing directly with this pandemic. And you see, my thoughts on this is that this is going to be a trend that is going to continue. The Joe Rogan effect is whereby you have non-trained journalists who are commanding a space, airwaves, on the digital channels, commanding the interest, the attention, the engagement, and indeed the ideologies of people who perhaps are anti-establishment or who want to hear a different view.